Hello everybody, my name's Colin D. Ellis and welcome to the Culture and Coffee podcast, where I discuss a news story or a topic of workplace culture and some practical things that you can do over the time it takes to drink a cup of coffee. So let's get into today's episode. Thanks for listening to today's podcast. If you'd like to find out more about how I can help you transform the culture of your team, head to my website at www.colindellis.com. Hello everyone, it's Colin Ellis here. Welcome to another episode of the Culture and Coffee podcast. Got my Kenyan coffee here. I'm going to get started straight away and talking about the culture crisis in sports. And I know what you're thinking, like straight away, you're like, but Colin, surely there's a culture crisis everywhere in the world of work. Which, when you read the media, it's kind of true, really. It's so depressing. I've talked about this before. But in a good way, like, you know, the whole point of this podcast is to give you things, ideas, stuff not to do. And there's plenty of that. But also some things to think about as well. But we're particularly highlighting culture in sport. One of the things that I find, you know, and I work with large kind of corporates around the world, is I feel that at least they're talking about it. Listen, most of them aren't actually taking any meaningful action, which is part of the problem. You still got a load of people in high office saying culture's the most important thing and then doing absolutely naff all about it. But in sports, I don't really feel that people are even talking about culture, which is a real surprise because there have been so many high-profile stories about sports around the world. Now, the one that you'll immediately remember, because it wasn't that long ago, you know, it's kind of recording this for, you know, week commencing the 27th of November, 23, the one you'll immediately remember that made the news, even if you're not interested in soccer, is the Spanish women's team who won the World Cup. And then there was the whole controversy. It's just appalling behaviour from Luis Rubiales, who was eventually dismissed, but he had to be dragged kicking and screaming away from his job. And of course, immediately, women's sports was thrown into the spotlight. But for those of us who've been, you know, kind of studying culture for a while, you know, a couple of weeks ago, I was talking to Kath Bishop. If you're not familiar with Kath does a lot of work in culture in the UK and again in sports. She's a former British Olympic rowing champion. She writes pieces for The Guardian as well. And you know, we were talking about the culture crisis in sports, you know, and from the worst case scenario, which is the US gymnastics team, to the little things that happen in everyday workplaces. You know, there was a story not so long ago in British horse racing where a trainer was fined for allowing a toxic workplace culture in the yard. Now, with all of these things, there's an element, and as I've talked about, if you're the first time listening to the podcast, you know, one of the consistent themes that I talk about is the fact that the world has changed. It's an obvious statement to make, but some people are yet to catch up with it. There are some people whose head is still buried in the sand. They think that they can behave how they want. They think that they can talk how they want, and that you know, that there are no repercussions, or somehow that, you know, kind of this culture, that, you know, the culture that we have now will just blow over and people will finally come to their senses and it's okay to shout and scream in people's faces and let's go back to the good old days where culture didn't really matter. Yet it's not going to happen. It's not going to. If your boss is one of those people, just send him this podcast and like, just listen to the first 3 minutes 30 of this podcast. It's not going to happen. We're not going backwards. Now, of course, there are many reasons for this. Principally, parents are bringing their children up to expect and demand better, because you know we were at the kind of end of this behaviour, and you know, because the question I often get asked is it generational? And well, of course it is. Like most things, of course it's generational. But don't overthink it. Don't stop blaming generations, because my generation, Generation X, is we're actually the people now who are starting to realize that unless we, the royal we, the entire generation of management, unless we create different conditions that are aligned to the social cultures within which we live right now, then we're not going to be able to attract the kind of talent and retain the kind of talented people that we need in order to be successful in whatever business we exist in. And of course, sports is no different. Now, the thing about sports is it's much more high profile than some of the corporates. There are some things happening in corporates, and if they're happening to you, I feel terribly sorry for you, and I hope you can find a way to kind of bring these things to the fore. I hope you've got an empathetic, not sympathetic, an empathetic HR department who can help you navigate these things. But within the world of sports, and in elite sports particularly, the media are very, very interested, very, very interested in any kind of element of toxic behavior. And players now and athletes are actually calling it out publicly. And so what we're seeing is a rise in kind of athletes feeding stories to the media in order to expose some of these behavior. And in the last year, 2 years, there have been allegations made against kind of rowing Canada, Australian swimming, I think, was one. There was Malaysian swimming. It's a theme here. British gymnastics, definitely. Maryland football team, and the Phoenix Suns, I think that was another one. Again, these are all kind of allegations brought about in the media. It's really, really important that sporting organisations, federations, and managers of teams and head coaches of teams really take this seriously. And what these allegations need is to be thoroughly investigated and not, as has happened in the past, swept under the carpet. What we need is the leaders of these organisations to actually take culture seriously. Now, tomorrow, so I'm recording this on Sunday because I'm about to get on a plane later this afternoon. I'm recording this Sunday morning. Tomorrow, Danny Donachie and I are publishing a paper about culture in sports and why, what organizations need to do to create safety for athletes and achieve high performance. But really, we want to shine a light on the fact that culture's not something that's done. Now, Danny's worked with in elite sports for 10, 15 years, 20 years even, and has got a lot of experience. He's very much seen the inside of the workings of sporting organizations. And, one of the things that he said to me was that it's just not, there's no structure to it. It's not taken seriously. It's not built in the way that corporates do. Now, for me, my experience of 30 years working in corporates in the private sector and the public sector. Now, I've worked with some sports teams, some forward-thinking sports teams along the way who've recognized that the world of work, and even though it's sports, it's still work. Right, you've still got athletes showing up to do their job. Don't think that it's any different from kind of the day to day. Of course, the routines are different. So I've worked with some sports organisations who've noticed, but mainly it's corporates. And what we see in the corporate world is people are starting to take it seriously. They understand the importance of values. They understand the importance of having a vision. They understand, kind of why behavior is important to delivery, all of these kinds of things. And so there's very much a structure. When I wrote Culture Fix, I really laid out what that structure was, those 6 pillars of culture, which apply to any business, purpose and vision, personality and communication, values, behavior, collaboration, innovation. I remember speaking to a sports leader, and he's like, I'm interested in how innovation plays out in a sporting context. I'm like, well, without any creativity from managers and head coaches, how do you ever change a system mid game? So let's take, field sports. What we want of managers and head coaches is to have different ways to set their team up in order to defeat an opponent. Also, we want them to think differently about how they use technology. Also, the support staff. So, people like sports scientists, physios, nutrition, constantly looking for ways to help athletes stay at peak performance. So, creativity, innovation, learning from failure, crucially important to sports, crucially important. And I think the thing is with sports, often that's different to kind kind of corporates is the outside influence. So, for example, a corporate organization may be regulated. There are certain regulations. And of course, for some industries, it's different. So you take a bank, there are certain rules and regulations for a bank that might be different if you're an agricultural manufacturing company, who I spoke to this week, interested in working on their culture, right? Different rules and regulations for them. It's around machinery, it's about safety, all those things. Whereas banks, it's about ethics, right? Yeah, it's about behavior. It's a different kind of behavior. Whereas with sports, the media can really have an influence on the culture of the organization by what they bring to light, because they can very much turn the supporters against the club, or else you can use it as fuel. Now, regular listeners will know of my lifelong affliction, which is supporting Everton. It is an affliction. Listen, there are pockets of euphoria, especially in the 80s, which is a long time ago. My daughter says, I can't believe you're still harking back to the 80s. It's all I've got. It's all I've got. And listen, there was one cup win in 95, which was one of the best days of my life. My wife still jokes that I enjoyed that more than the wedding. It's not true. She usually finishes listening to that point. It's totally true. It's a great day out. But you know, kind of what's playing out of my club at the minute, for those of you who follow the story, Everton have been deducted points, a lot of points, far too many points, but that's a whole other podcast, right? And what that's done now is galvanise the culture of the club, because they kind of broke the rules, and there's no one saying they haven't broken the rules. Because they broke the rules, they were deducted points, which has sent them almost to the bottom of the Premier League. And what that's done is that's a rule from the governing body. It's affected the culture. So the head coach or the manager, Sean Dyche, has come out and talked about it's going to galvanise the club, and it is. And the supporters are planning a protest, and it's brought us all together. It's brought the supporters together with the team, together with the actual club, where there has been a massive division. Over the last 2 to 3 years, there's been a massive division. So that's a real kind of example of how external factors can influence the culture of the club. And it's brought everybody together. Will there still be internal divisions? Yes, there will. And it's only when the club resets its culture, and they do it in a very structured way, that we have complete clarity as an entire club as to what we're gunning for. And so the let's say the ticket office staff are connected with the support staff, are connected with the athletes. And we get this complete connection because we understand what our new values are, because we've got a whole different set of challenges, so the values might have to change. We understand what our new vision is. So our vision kind of at the start of the season may be to have, kind of achieved mid-table mediocrity. What a way to go. Actually, that's the goal. The vision would be to really reset the club and how it's viewed, right? But what's that vision now that we're in the position that we're in? Also, what behaviours are we going to need to see from athletes, support staff, coaches, fans? So as fans, if we lose a game, what we can't afford to do is get on the team's back. What they need is our support, because, only through our support can they actually perform week in, week out. Listen, they've still got to train really hard. And the big part of it, is athlete attitude and all of these kind of things. But it's only when you actually define what's required. How are we going to work together? How are we going to collaborate? What does teamwork look like? It's not enough just to have one captain. We need 11 captains on the pitch, but we don't need 11 captains at the same time. Otherwise, we'll kind of lose our focus on what we're supposed to do. We need different players to take different responsibilities on the pitch. But this will then permeate through. And when the team wins, the community wins. So when Everton win a game, the whole community of Liverpool benefits, because there are no Liverpool fans in Liverpool. No one in Liverpool supports Liverpool. They all live in like Ireland and Scandinavia and stuff. It's an old joke, but I'm going to keep running with it. I don't care. But the community benefits, at least half of the community benefits. And so what that does, it factors back into social cultures. And so what we need of our sporting organisations is to start to take culture seriously. What we need from them is to really understand the dynamics of how they build something that has a strong set of values, that understands the behaviors that they need to outwardly project, and to make sure that athletes understand that attitude's important, mindset's important when they actually join a club. So one of the things that we do in the corporate world is we use our values as a mechanism for hiring people. So we want to hire people who believe the things that we do. Right. So when we're looking to build a kind of a high performance and athlete culture, we want to make sure that everyone's connected to those values. What we don't want is people who behave in an adjunct way to the value set that we have, because that's when the media call them personality clashes. And there's an element of that. And we get personality clashes when we don't actually take the time to understand each other's personalities. Again, in the corporate world, we're doing some of this work. Certainly I'm doing this work with my clients to help connect people. Because only when you connect individuals can you communicate effectively. That leads to collaboration, which then engenders really good feedback, such that we can continually improve, add new ideas, and that's where success lives. It's a very simple formula. Don't get me wrong. There's a ton of hard work that goes behind that. And the work that Danny and I are going to be doing with sports teams is we're going to go in and analyze from a club perspective, what does the club culture look like? What's your vision? What's your values? It could be a federation that we work with. It could be like a FIFA or a UEFA or an International Olympic Committee. Culturally, what messages are you sending out as a federation? What things are you talking about? How are you making culture important? But crucially, how are you educating people on culture in sport? How are you helping people who do coaching programs to really understand what culture is and how to build a really good one, so that we can get away from this toxic culture crisis that rears its head every now and again? Now, of course, like most corporates and like most government agencies, it's not like culture's toxic all of the time. Right? There's peaks and troughs. But you speak to any employer, you speak to the person next to you, and ask yourselves, how many times can you get up in the morning and say, I'm going to work in a brilliant culture today? Like, I'd love it to be 4 days out of 5. And it might be for a couple of months on end, but it's not all of the time. But it's only when you take the time to define that culture that you're ever able to consistently achieve it. And in sports, particularly in elite sports, what we're looking for is consistent high performance. The teams that win, right? And remember, winning is not a bad thing. Winning at all costs is a very bad thing, because when we win at all costs, we compromise the culture, right? In our determination to achieve the goal. And this for me lies at the essence of kind of the toxic culture in elite sports. This is why what we're shooting for is that 4 out of 5 days, because no one's perfect. This is why we're aiming for that real definition of what it means, right, to be elite performance. Is that actual agreement of what's the right way to do this? Because for far too long, there's been this continual pursuit of high performance. And high performance to a lot of old-fashioned people is to shout and scream abuse at athletes, at support staff. And even internally, athletes screaming at support staff. If you're a physio, you might have kind of encountered this. I spoke to one physio earlier this year. He said, the way that they treat me is terrible. And there's no recourse because that's who he is. No, it's not. No, it's not. So organizations, teams, federations, they have to build these cultures that have a really strong value set, and then they have to connect the athletes to each other, and then they have to work together to achieve that continual high performance and provide feedback to each other on when they're not achieving the standards that they set, when they're not behaving in the way that they should. Now, to actually write the white paper, I went away and did loads of research, and Danny was great and essentially fed me all of these papers, these sports research papers. And one of them was from Selinovic, Drew, Dijkstra, Waddington and Serpel, 2022. Right, so last year, team culture, they said, a shared set of values that inform a group's behaviour. Absolutely. It's considered one of the most prominent contributors to the success of a sporting organisation. Now, they wrote that as if that's a new thing. And yet, for someone like me who's been working in the corporate world for 30 years, I know, and I've got the empirical evidence that demonstrates that culture is the number one contributor to the success of a sporting organisation. And if you look from a sports team's perspective, the teams that win consistently are the ones where you have talented people who are part of a vibrant winning culture, who know how to behave and support each other such that they continually improve what they do to achieve the goals that have been set. It's no accident. Teams with the worst cultures don't win leagues. Teams with the worst cultures don't top medal tables. You know, one of the great things that I saw during the Olympics was, you know, how teams celebrated together. You're watching athletes supporting other athletes in the stand. You'll see it. You see it at the Olympics when a you know, kind of a runner or a sprinter or someone in the stadium wins a race. The first thing they do is go over to their team in the stands, who are all there to support them. It doesn't matter what sport they're excelling in. Now, we still need each individual to do their... I'm sorry, get really excited talking about this, climb down off my soapbox a little bit. We need every individual to make the most of their talent. There's a great quote that I love, right? It's hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. We've got many, many talented individuals in sport, but you've got to have the right attitude. You've got to have the right mindset. But also you've got to be supported by the team culture. There are many examples of people, of athletes, and, you know, and people in the corporate world, of athletes who, you know, and the media always report on them, people didn't live up to their talent. And I'd argue that those people weren't given the right support. Right? Often the right support. Now, don't get me wrong, a lot of them make really, really bad decisions. Right, and there are just some people who are destined not to make the most of their talent. But I'd like to think with the right intervention, with the right support, and with the right team around them, right? And empathy is the glue that keeps teams together. Right? With the right empathy from teammates is we help each other. As soon as the team starts talking behind each other's backs, you know what you've got a culture that's starting to fight in amongst itself, right? These fighting cultures where people understand their roles, but there's poor behavior, there's cliques, there's personality clashes, and those things just undermine sustained high performance. Or else what you've got is what I'd call it in sporting context, an obliging culture. Oh yeah, we're happy to do what you tell us, but there's no intrinsic motivation. So like as a manager, as a head coach, you say, our training's 9 till, I don't know, 1, 9 till 12:30. And then, you know, players at 12:30 are like, okay, I'm done. Rather than thinking, what do I need to do to either improve my performance, or what do I need to do to improve my skills? Now, for most people, they may be done at 12:31 whenever they finish, right? And then they've got a choice of what they do in the afternoon, right? And it's all about self-help. And, you know, Danny's been working for athletes for years on this. He's kind of one of those real people that athletes can trust, because he really helps them to do that, you know. And for me, who does team dynamics, I'm always recommending coaches, if there's an individual who's not quite doing it, or there's a senior manager, that I often work one-to-one with them, say these are the things that we need to think about. Because obliging cultures where you just do what you're told, there just isn't enough drive, you know, and opportunities for me are missed. And then lastly, you've got the stagnating cultures. And the stagnating cultures are where teams got no cohesion, there's no real relationships, everything's completely broken down. The media are reporting on it. In fact, the media have stopped reporting on it because everyone's like, oh, that's just typical of them. Everybody knows who they are. But that winning culture, where players, athletes have got the mentality, where the coaches understand how to behave, where support staff are seen as part of the team, not outside of the team, where athletes are talking to frontline staff as if they were friends. There's no separation. You've not got kind of individual athletes just surrounded by their entourage. You're doing your bit for the team because you know without that, you're never going to win in whatever context. And I do believe that there is a culture crisis in sport, and it's time for sporting federations, for governing bodies, for organizations, clubs, for head coaches, for support staff. It's time for everybody involved to take culture seriously and create winning cultures that people want to be part of. All right, that's your Culture and Coffee podcast for today. Hope you enjoyed it. Ta-ra for now.